In our first video on the worst jobs of the Great War, we looked at 4 examples, but the dangers and hardships didn't end there. In this video, we're going to take a look at an additional 4 jobs you wouldn't have wanted to be assigned in the First World War. So you better have changed your socks since that last one, troopers, because you'll likely be needing all your toes. Hitting the ground running, we've got the military couriers, or runners of the First World War. Back in the early 1900s, field telephones were commonplace in the military, but they were unreliable and prone to damage. Radio existed too, but it was largely considered insecure for use on the front line, and while carrier pigeons and flares had their uses, they had their limitations too. And so, good old word of mouth prevailed, and soldiers unfortunate enough to be fit and healthy were often tasked with the duty of storing messages in their brain and delivering them on foot. While jogging and other forms of physical exercise in the midst of war suck, this was by no means the worst part of the job. Like sentries and radio operators, runners were targeted by the enemy, and as veteran Lieutenant Alan L. Dexter put it, it was merely a question of how long you would last before being wounded or killed. While runners could follow friendly trench systems in some instances, cover like this wasn't always available, and zigzagging through the trenches wasn't always the most efficient way to get a message across. As such, there were plenty of opportunities for a runner to get shot or ambushed, and due to the need to travel light, they often carried little more than a pistol in the way of self-defense. Often, more than one runner would be sent out too, and each would use a different path, as that way, as an American sergeant put it, one at least will be certain to arrive. British Colonel Lord Feversham volunteered as a runner in the First World War. At one point, he was given a message and instructed, "There is no room to pass along the trench, so you must run along the top. You'll probably be killed, but you must go." But Feversham survived, and in another briefing he was told, if necessary, he was to shoot 5 Germans and then himself. He was then fed whiskey and sent on his way. British Private James Miller was a runner too, and he gave his life delivering his final message. Miller's act of bravery was featured in the London Gazette, which read, "Private Miller was ordered to take an important message under heavy shell and rifle fire, and to bring back a reply at all costs. He was compelled to cross the open, and on leaving the trench was shot almost immediately in the back. In spite of this, he compressed the gaping wound, delivered his message, staggered back with his answer, and fell dead at the feet of the officer to whom he delivered it." It's also important to note that not all runners were on foot, and horses and motor vehicles were used when circumstances permitted it. Overall, Lieutenant Dexter said that out of all infantry jobs, the runners was the hardest and most dangerous. While runners were among the most agile units on the battlefield, tanks were perhaps the slowest. The technology just wasn't quite there yet, and the armor of the Great War wasn't all that armored and about as comfortable as stepping on Lego. It's for these reasons that being a tank crewman was one of the worst jobs available. Tanks were employed to break the stagnation of trench warfare, designed to crawl over trenches and barbed wire, more so than to engage other tanks. Early tanks were incredibly slow, boasting a speed of as low as 4 kilometers per hour, and they could even be penetrated by small arms fire, grenades, and mortars. While spalling wasn't a major concern, bullet splash was, and crewmen were provided goggles and chainmail masks to counter this. However, these limited their ability to see and breathe and were seldom worn. The threats didn't end there though. Gas fumes from the tank's guns crept into the tank, poisoning its crew, and the tank's working parts, notably its engine, quickly got red hot, making an oven of the interior. The machinery was also deafeningly loud, and there was no suspension nor anywhere to strap in. Crewmen were literally bounced around inside the tank. On top of this, the vehicles had terrible control, and they frequently broke down. Richard Smith, director of the Tank Museum in Bovington, expressed his opinions about First World War tanks. The engine is in the middle, and it kind of glows red hot. You're cooking. It leaks carbon monoxide merrily into the crew compartment, so you get gassed. You feel every impact of everything. It goes through everything. A veteran known as only A. Rifer described the conditions inside his tank. There was a terrific amount of noise in the tank made up by the engine, the tracks, and the tumbling about of the various things inside. Rifer also recalled a specific situation in which he was fired upon by German machine guns. The impact of their bullets was making the inside of the armor plate white hot, and the white hot flakes were coming off, and if you happened to be near enough, you could have been blinded by them. One Lieutenant Vic Huffam recalled the situation in which a tank in his unit became stuck. He attempted to cross a disused support trench, and as he crossed it, the parapet crumbled beneath him. His tail end or his backside of the tank disappeared into the trench. Huffman tried to tow the tank out, but in doing so, his own tank became tangled with it and they were locked together. Now, the destruction of a tank was one thing, but to see a Zeppelin airship go down would have been terrifying indeed. Imagine then how their aircrew would have felt. During the First World War, Germany used Zeppelins for reconnaissance operations and as bombers, and while they weren't so effective in strategic bombing missions overall, being rather inaccurate, they caused some damage in raids on London, and they certainly had a psychological impact on the British population. Of course, Zeppelins were little more than glorified party balloons, and the British quickly learned how to counter them from ground to air, exploiting explosive and incendiary rounds and their interaction with helium. Flying higher to avoid British defences, Zeppelin crewmen suffered from the extreme cold and altitude sickness, and the Zeppelins themselves had to carry smaller payloads and strike from greater distances, rendering them less effective. Zeppelins were also prone to mechanical failures, and they were useless in a bit of wind. Due to the weight of early 1900s parachutes, the crew weren't provided any, and so there was literally no way off the Zeppelin that didn't involve skydiving. When Zeppelins were hit and turned into plummeting columns of hellfire, crewmen pretty much had to decide whether they would jump or burn alive. Overall, 66% of German Zeppelins in the Great War were shot down or disabled, and the casualty rate of the German airship crew was around 40%. The horror of a Zeppelin death, however, is best expressed through the eyes of the people who saw it. British reporter Michael McDonough witnessed the death of a Zeppelin on the 1st of October 1916. The Zeppelin drifted perpendicularly in the darkened sky, a gigantic pyramid of flames, red and orange, like a ruined star falling slowly to Earth. It was so horribly fascinating that I felt spellbound, almost suffocated with emotion. One body was found in the field some distance from the wreckage. He must have jumped from a considerable height. So great was the force with which he struck the ground that I saw the imprint of his body clearly defined in the stubbly grass. Another reporter described the fall of another Zeppelin. The blazing airship swung around and the burning end dipped. The flames ran up the whole structure as her petrol tanks, one after another, caught fire. So tremendous was the blaze and so intense the light that she seemed to be an immense incandescent mantle at white heat and enveloped in flame. She struck the earth with a crash that could be heard for miles. We mentioned horses when we discussed runners, but now it's time to expand on that, as cavalry were used to some effect in the Great War, and those poor horses were military personnel too. At the start of the war, cavalry were perceived as an essential component of warfare, filling the shock tactics role claimed by later tanks. As the war progressed, more and more cavalry charges succumbed to machine guns, mortars, artillery, poison gas, trenches, and barbed wire, and they became less and less prevalent. But by no means were they abandoned. Overall, cavalry were far more effective on the Eastern Front than the Western Front, in open spaces and against less technologically advanced opponents, and hundreds of thousands of these horses died throughout the war, with around 25% perishing in battle. Many horses, however, didn't see battle, employed for logistical support instead, and a great number of them died from disease and exhaustion. About his loyal steed Warrior, British General Jack Seeley said he had to endure everything most hateful to him. Violent noise, the bursting of great shells, and bright flashes at night, when the white light of bursting shells must have caused violent pain to such sensitive eyes as horses possess. Above all, the smell of blood is terrifying to every horse. Lieutenant Mercer survived the cavalry charge at Hujj, Palestine on the 8th of November 1917. He recalled the following: "Machine guns and rifles opened up on us the moment we topped the rise behind which we had formed up. A whole heap of men and horses went down 20 or 30 yards from the muzzles of the guns. The squadron broke into a few scattered horsemen at the guns and it seemed to melt away completely." Well, I'm not a horse, so I can't speak much for that last one, but out of the terrible jobs of the First World War we covered in this video, and in the video before, I have to say that trench raiding takes the cake for me. But which job do you think would have sucked the most and which you would have tried to avoid? And are there any we've missed? Let us know in the comments section below. And just before you go guys, if you want to join our wider community, make sure you check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and Discord. All these links are in the description below. And if you want to help support the channel and get access to an exclusive video that we post once a month only on the Patreon and Armchair History TV, then make sure you consider joining us. Anyways guys, as always, thank you so much for watching and I hope you learned something new.